5G is going to be the next big thing upon inception. Telecom companies are engaging their prowess in providing 5G services across verticals. This session on future of 5G and future with 5G will talk upon how 5G is going to be the game changer for the enterprises, healthcare, manufacturing, and allied industries and the society at large. I would like to call upon for this session Sandeep Gupta, EVP Chief Architect Network, Airtel, Bharat Bhatia, President, ITU-APT Foundation of India, and the session will be moderated by Prabhu, Head, Industry Intelligence Group, CyberMedia Research. Over to you, Prabhu.
Good afternoon and welcome to this session. We are going to talk about 5G, the future of 5G as such. Quick introduction, my name is Prabhu and I lead research and consulting at CMR. I have with me two distinguished panelists. From Airtel, we have Sandeep Gupta. He is EVP Chief Architect Network. We also have Bharat Bhatia. He's the president at ITU-APT Foundation of India. Gentlemen, welcome to this session. Really appreciate your time, taking this opportunity and being here with us. Just to set the context, we are looking at, the transformative evolution of this 5G era as such. How prepared are we? What the future holds for us. That's the overall theme of this session. To kick that off, Sandeep, if I can turn to you first and ask you about what are your plans for 5G, and especially the core, and what are the challenges that you are currently seeing and which needs to be resolved in terms of, for instance, moving from the 4G to 5G core as such. How ready are we with respect to 5G? So over to you, Sandeep.
Thanks, Prabhu, and good afternoon, everyone. Really pleasure to be part of this discussion, which is so relevant as 5G is very close to, is expected to be very close happening in this year or mid of this year. I think just to pick up this point, Prabhu, I would say that let me start with saying that what we are doing at Airtel, as Airtel, we have demonstrated 5G way back in 2021. Using our 4G spectrum, the FDD spectrum, and we were the first one to demonstrate our 5G capabilities in Hyderabad when we deployed 5G in the 4G, in the FDD spectrum, and we could showcase that using our existing spectrum and the infrastructure that we have already deployed across country, it is ready for the 5G services in NSA mode. What we've done over the last 6 months, thanks to DOT, is through the trial spectrum, we've actually learned a lot in terms of complete deployment of 5G in other bands as well. So we got the spectrum in 3.5 gigahertz, we got it in millimeter wave band, and then we got it in sub-gigahertz spectrum in 700 band. What we've done over the last 6 to 8 months is really deployed these 5G clusters in different cities. For one, learning, getting the experience in terms of what would it take for the infrastructure to be upgraded for 5G deployment. And that has been a learning. But I think the other learning has been the performance of 5G and some of the use cases that we've been able to build both with the global partners and the local partners on 5G. I think I'll share some interesting aspects that 5G certainly has a promise to bring higher capacity, higher concurrencies, and lower latencies. And what we have demonstrated is that we have been able to achieve gigabit speeds on mid-band, more than 4 to 5 Gbps speeds using millimeter wave band. And most interestingly for our market, I would say we've been able to achieve a long distance, 10 kilometer, 12 kilometer cell radius, or the range from the cell site, where the user can still get more than 200 Mbps type of downlink experience. Using sub-gigahertz, we have even gone up to 20 kilometers from the cell tower, where the users can get good downlink throughputs. So I think that's promising for India market because we certainly are having lack of fiberization of our households and enterprises. And this type of technology will certainly be able to connect every hook and corner of the country, at least on the last mile, and provide connectivity both to our enterprises and residential customers. That being one, I think we have also done use cases which are going to basically provide enriched experience to our end customers, whether you talk about 4K, 8K video, immersive AR, VR, which we recently also did using education as a use case. And this becomes a foundation for the metaverse experience that we're talking, which is going to hit us in the next 3 to 5 years. Beyond that, we also went ahead and did testing of cloud gaming. We demonstrated cloud gaming on 5G. And why cloud gaming? Because it's the way to see the gaming for future, where you don't need to download the game on your handset and you don't have to be dependent upon the memory storage of the handset or the compute of the handset. All these will be rendered from the remote edge or the edge cloud, as we call it, MEC. And that will basically have the capability to render the gaming experience. What you need for that is obviously lower latency, because you have to have the actions from the user to be transported to the edge, and then the edge will render the right video experience or the right video graphics. So I think this is all very interesting for what end users can look up to from 5G. But we went beyond the retail experience, and we really launched 5G for business, which I think is the next important or next enabler in terms of what 5G can do for enterprises. Interestingly, we had a lot of use cases that were demonstrated for multiple verticals, whether it is about mining, manufacturing, automobiles, connected workforce, healthcare, education, as I said, and even up to retail and ports. So this is the way we see 5G, MEC, and AIML coming together in terms of these technologies really providing the value to the enterprises to transform themselves and digitize their own operations and the way they connect to the customers. You asked the question about core. I think we have been virtualizing the core network over the last 3 years of our deployment, even in 4G network. Now, what it means for users here in this discussion is that a virtualized core that we have already deployed in 4G is capable to be upgraded to provide 5G services, both for NSA and SA. So I think this is the benefit of having a software-defined network that we've been deploying over the last 3 years. And we don't see a challenge in terms of upgrading the core network, both from a signaling perspective, the bearer perspective, and even the subscriber management perspective towards 5G. So all in all, we are very excited and we're ready for 5G deployment. The only thing we need is obviously the spectrum, which is to be more affordable, interference-free, and obviously we need the right spectrum, both for access and backhaul. And I can build upon some of that aspect in terms of what we are requesting as operators from regulators as well as licensor, DOT, to ensure that the spectrum for access and the backhaul, which is the E-band, is all provided to make sure that we are able to roll out 5G without any bottlenecks.
Hey, thank you for that. I love that you touched upon the use cases as well, and at CyberMedia Research, we have over the past year or so, through the course of the pandemic, looked at what 5G means for consumers. And one of the things which stood out is video creation is really high, for as far as the young generation is concerned. What we looked at were like geographies like Western Europe and as well as China. And it's interesting that content creation, content consumption, as well as gaming in India is on the rise. And that's where consumers are really looking at their smartphones to enable such use cases. And that's what we are seeing in terms of the 5G capable phones out there. Bharat, if I can come to you and understand from you, what are those use cases which you are seeing for 5G? Are these use cases which 5G will fasten a bit further, or there are entirely new futuristic 5G use cases which will come as of today, which we are not aware of maybe?
Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm really pleased to be here. This is really a great opportunity to showcase the 5G just before India goes on the auction of the 5G spectrum. Hopefully, TRAI will give the recommendation soon, and we will be able to see the 5G services. As Sandeep brought out, it can bring a lot of benefits to the customers. and really could be a game changer. But let me take you back a bit. We are talking today of 5G rollout. But in the ITU, the area where I work in the ITU, we started working on the mobile technologies way back in 1985, when we had the first vision of what we call as Future Public Land Mobile Service, FPLMTS, such a long name. And it really created a buzz around the word that something like that could be done. And that took around 15 years to translate from the initial thought process in 85. And we had the first global IMT standard, as we call it, IMT 2000, which we now know as 3G. So IMT 2000 became a reality in the year 2000, with the ITU coming up with the standard, which everybody could follow around the world. It was not just any single vendor coming up with a solution or a single operator implementing something. It was a truly global standard. IMT 2000 or 3G, although 3G didn't take off too well in India, but it was kind of a path breaker to move away from the simple voice and text that the GSM used to offer. And that journey then continued on to the 4G, which we call as IMT 2012, IMT Advanced. That standard came up in 2012, and that took around 9 years to complete compared to the 15 years that was taken by the first generation. And IMT Advanced is a 4G, which we all see today being implemented by all the operators, and we get a lot of fruits from that. But the ITU didn't stop at that. We continued working from 2015 onward. We started working on the 5G standard, or what we call as IMT 2020. And that standard basically got finally approved last year as the IMT 2020 set of standards, where we have basically a unified global standard. Instead of in 4G, we had a number of standards, although one became predominant. 2020, IMT 2020 is a unified global standard driven by 3GPP and providing not just the voice and data, but a lot of other things. And I don't know whether many of you would have seen that famous triangle shape that we had in ITU in the vision document 2083. There was a very well-known document, a figure of a triangle which had 3 points. If you look at the top, it was the enhanced mobile broadband. That means mobile broadband continued to be the driving. You need a faster speeds of data. You need much high speed. But it was not just that. So what we used to call as a gigabit in a second, a gigabyte in a second became the buzzword for driving the 5G standard. But at the same time, the other two ends of the triangle that we saw, the one called the massive machine type communication, MMTC. And that drove all the IoT, the smart cities, the new kind of factories, smart homes. All of those are driven from this MMTC concept that is built into this 5G technology standard. And at the third end of this triangle is what we call as URLLC, ultra reliable low latency communications. So URLLC basically is the foundation, I would say, as we move from 5G to 6G. It's a way of not just communication, not just data. It is going to provide high speed videos. It is going to provide robotic communication. It is going to provide the health connectivity. It is going to provide the agriculture communication. It's going to provide the mission critical communication that the defense needs or public safety needs. For example, the self-driven cars, the automated cars, all of them are driven by the third part of this 5G triangle, where you have the ultra reliable and low latency communications. So this basically, the triangle forms the basis of the ITU standard that has been approved last year, and that is driving the 5G takeoff And as Sandeep rightly mentioned, there are a lot of new use cases in India. In fact, you might recall in India, the government has set up the high-level forum in 2017, which not only created the spectrum roadmap, but also created the user roadmap, what kind of uses we are going to drive in the area of health, in the area of administration, in the area of e-governance, in the area of agriculture, in the area of navigation, in the area of fishing. And all of those have been very well documented and very well being pursued through this government initiative of HLF. Now, what's happening is that this same process, now we are going to take it further up when we move to the IMT 2030, for which the work is just now starting. We from the ITU-APT Foundation of India have just given a proposal to the ITU as what should be the vision for the IMT 2030, or as we call 6G. So there is a lot of work that is going on around the world. My only thinking is that we as India need to lobby ourselves, as to combine ourselves, as to make us cohesive. Operators need to play a slightly larger role in terms of this. But there's one other use case I want to very highlight where the 5G is differentiating from the 4G. And that is what is called the industrial 5G. Lot of industries and societal applications are coming up as a people call it, many countries call it a private 5G, many countries call it industrial 5G. For industry, if 4.0 kind of thinking, where you have a lot of robotics, a lot of automated manufacturing, this whole concept of industrial 5G is already starting taking off. And many countries around the world, whether US or Germany or UK, have already started providing spectrum for that. And many of you would have heard about this Mercedes factories in Germany, which is totally based on 5G on a special spectrum in the C-band that has been provided for that factory. So a lot of initiatives happening around the world. US has started the CBRS, which is another concept of a 5G for industrial uses. So many other usage kind of things are being worked out. But when we go towards 6G, there's a lot more that is going to happen. And Sandeep mentioned Meta. I think Metaverse is going to take over us in a big way. But not just Meta, but artificial reality, as what we call as Internet of Senses. Moving from Internet of Things, that IoT we all know, we are moving to iOS, where is going to be Internet of Senses. So you won't just be having the voice and data, but you will be having a touch and feel also being communicated over this network. And that is the kind of vision that we are thinking of in terms of 6G. Thank you.
Absolutely wonderful. You covered a vast footprint there in terms of the use cases starting from today going into the far future. Sandeep, if I could come to you, that's the one thing which we wanted to know, like when we look at 2030, what are those realities? You mentioned cloud gaming, you mentioned metaverse. I'm aware that cloud gaming is something where you've already started taking initiatives at Airtel. If you could touch upon those realities as of today, and then talk about how we would see 2030 come to vision as such when it comes to 5G. Over to you, Sandeep.
Yeah, Prabhu, it's a very interesting question. It's like asking somebody to gaze in the crystal ball and tell us what's going to happen 8 years from now or decade from now. But I think the way I'd like to pick it up is talk about what has happened in the past and use that learning to predict what is expected to happen in the future. I think over the last 5-6 years, we've seen how telecom and telcos have really been playing a pivotal role in realizing Prime Minister's vision of digital India. I think it goes clearly very well founded now that mobile broadband networks are the backbone and the foundation for providing digital services in every sphere of our life. I think, in fact, COVID re-established this aspect further on. And now we have no other way to work and engage without having mobile broadband with us. So I think that's one thing that we've learned in the past. If you look at last, again, decade, we've seen we were almost like 5% smartphones, and we now at almost at about 70% smartphones, or maybe 75% smartphones. So that's one thing that we're realizing. The broadband consumption is the maximum in India, almost touching 21 GB per month per user, and at a very, very affordable rate that obviously industry has been able to work through with all its challenges, to say so. But I think what we are seeing is mobile broadband networks and broadband connectivity is going to play a pivotal role going forward in making India the largest digital economy and realizing the dream from moving from a $3 trillion economy to a $5 trillion economy. 60% of the delta increment of the GDP is expected to come from digital services. Now, just to come back to the points which our end users would like to know as to what we see from 5G, I see three different aspects that will happen as reality in the next course of 5 to 7 years or a decade. One, we're seeing at this time around 10 to 15 million households getting connected on fiber. This number would certainly be more than 100 million or around 100 million households which will get connected over some way of mobile broadband, whether it is wired broadband or it is fixed wireless broadband, providing more than 100 Mbps to 1 Gbps type of experience, where users will be able to have this immersive video experience sitting at their home, virtual showrooms, augmented reality enabling the metaverse that I mentioned earlier. And their ways to engage in terms of compute requirements would completely change. Today, you have compute in your hand physically in terms of having the compute storage and the whole peripheral, the whole periphery at your own in your own location. What is expected to happen with this 5G is that most of these things will come from as a cloud. We've seen this in the last decade. Storage has come largely from the cloud. It has started coming. Now you don't store things on your handset so much, but you store them more in the cloud. Going forward, even the compute and memory, or the compute and the memory requirements during the compute are going to come from the cloud as well. But that's one aspect. Second aspect, certainly the smartphone will change and transform from where they are, the 700 million smartphones, they will transform from 4G to 5G. In fact, what we're predicting is the next 3 years time frame, maybe 50% of the smartphones in India will anyway be 5G compatible. At this time, it's around 5%. And by end of the decade, as we've seen in the last decade, 100% of the smartphones are expected to be obviously be 5G. The third dimension that I would talk about, which is now started to bring up the reality in reality as well, is about drones. I think we've not seen drones so much so in the last decade, but we will see the drones coming into reality and playing a really important role in enhancing the digital services, whether it is about logistics, video surveillance, asset management, providing connectivity, in terms of visibility to the enterprises or to the government from traffic management perspective or resource management perspective. They will play a very, very important role. And why this is important for technology players is that connectivity to the drones, which are flying at 100 meters, 200 meters, will not be possible necessarily through a terrestrial network. This will need a non-terrestrial network, which is going to come from the low Earth orbit satellites that we are working on through OneWeb. And even this will come through HAPS platform, the high altitude platform services, which is going to be the new thing down the line, where you'll have base stations deployed in the stratosphere, and that will be a reality. And those will be providing broadband connectivity to the drones or to these non-terrestrial flying objects. So I think that's a reality that I would like to see and our users to kind of visualize. Now, if I have to put some things very interesting from an end user, let me just put these things in one perspective for maybe the enterprises and the end users. I'll just narrate a small story, which I think is kind of help us visualize what is expected to change. Now, let's say today you want to buy a car, let's say a vehicle for your own use. As Bharat said, automobile companies are automating their factories. Now, why are they automating it? Because today I want to buy a vehicle of a particular type with a particular specification, with a particular color. I have to wait for long because factories don't customize themselves based upon the user requirement, but that will be a reality. So if I start a journey of a vehicle, the vehicle will be customized because the factories are going to be very flexible in the way they can configure their own assets and manufacturing lines depending upon the user requirements. So you punch in your order, it will be more customized, it will be less lead time. But as the vehicle comes out, it will be connected completely wherever you go. It will have mobile broadband connectivity, the complete infotainment system, having complete telemetry on the go. So that's another aspect, that while the telemetry is on the go, what will happen is all the information of your vehicle in terms of the way the mechanical parts, electrical parts are working, it will go back into the manufacturer and the service agents to make sure that they know what is going wrong and they can predict as to when the vehicle will require service. So you don't have to really worry about when do you need to take your vehicle for service. It will tell you a pre-alert that this is the time that you better be, or you bring your vehicle for service. And more interestingly, the logistics for the service companies, they will know what part needs to be changed when the vehicle hits us, let's say 2 days down the line. So their whole asset management in terms of how they're maintaining the spares, which location they maintain, what type of spares, would be all digitized. So it's a ease for end customer. It is a ease for enterprises, bringing more efficiencies. And I think as we go about, even the insurance agencies will get benefited because they will know the driver habits. They will know the vehicle, health in a better manner than they do today. So I think the whole digitization of these type of assets, these type of experiences is going to completely transform in the next 3 to 5 years, 5 years plus. And then I think we are all talking about autonomous vehicles, the driverless vehicles, which I don't want to go there at this time, but yes, that's a reality that will hopefully be with us, 8 to 10 years from now.
Hey, Sandeep, thanks for essentially what you're saying is it's a interesting future that we are looking at. It is a smart future that we are looking at that will be enabled by 5G. Just one more follow-up question to you there on the question of cyber security as such. How do we look at 5G and cyber security? What's your perspective there, Sandeep? If you could share, yeah.
Yeah, Prabhu, I think a very relevant point, and I think a very, very, relevant discussion that the industry is having, because what's happening is, let's look at the environment. I think because of 5G or generally otherwise as well, in terms of how this whole cloud networks, 5G networks, artificial intelligence is coming into play, IoT is coming into play, is that a lot of entities are now getting connected to the network, and the networks are getting connected through open APIs towards other networks, whether it is the enterprise networks, the content players, the application providers. So there is a lot of interconnectivity happening right from the end device to the telecom network, and telecom networks talking to multiple other networks in the cloud. And this is where this whole openness is bringing a benefit, but also a challenge in terms of how these networks or entities interact, and where can we have security issues in terms of either the data of the user getting compromised, or the traffic getting intercepted, or the malicious attack on the networks because of the endpoints. So this is something that is of a concern, but there are good things that are happening within 3GPP or the specifications. One thing which is getting more secure as we go about in 5G is the user information is going to be more and more encrypted. And user no need to worry that their mobile information is going on the air interface or on the network. It will be encrypted right from the device. So this will be completely secure, so nobody can intercept as to what is the individual identity, which was possible to do in 4G. So that's one way that users can feel more secure, that their identity will be concealed right from the handset up to the network. It will not be, it is not in plain text, it is encrypted. Second point that we're seeing is we are actually establishing a security operating center, which is looking at all vulnerabilities across our network and all the APIs or the POIs or the interfaces that we have towards the external world. So every day you can say there is a vulnerability check that is happening on our network elements, because there are software upgrades happening. All these things are getting virtualized. So you need to upgrade your cloud infrastructure. You need to have application upgrades. But with every upgrade, there is a proactive vulnerability check which is happening at our security operating center across our network. And the beauty of this operating center is we are able to extend this as a service to the enterprises so that their enterprise network, let's say their routers, their switches, their IT infrastructure, can also be managed from a SASE perspective, from security as a service perspective. So I think this is the way we are trying to make things more secure. But last thing if I want to touch upon is that there are endpoint securities that we have to be worried about. The endpoint security is the smartphone and the IoT devices which are coming openly in the network, and they are coming from an open market perspective. There are a lot of these providers who are providing these devices. They really have to be secured as well, wherein we are working very closely with the handset providers. But I think the IoT is a very big game going forward. Billions of devices will come. So we are obviously talking to the regulator, to the policymakers, that how do we make sure that these endpoints are also equally secure? We've seen the password are not fully secure; they can be hacked. So I think that's something that we need to work as industry and make sure that the open market devices are equally secure when they're being used by enterprises or the retail customers.
Got you.
Thanks,
But
Prabhu.
how do you look at cyber security as such? What's your take? There could be a lot of bad actors also who could come into play when 5G becomes a reality. So how do you really see tackling cyber security and cyber crimes as such?
Yeah, I think this is again a very valid point, especially when you're talking about digital services like fintech. So I think these are not necessarily about 5G, but 5G will accentuate the type of issues because everything will go towards a digital service. So I do get this perspective, and we are very careful about what all we need to do. So as Airtel, we have taken measures, or maybe I would say safety nets for the customers. If you would have heard about Airtel's Safe Pay, where we are doing double authentications on behalf of the customer and the enterprise who is providing this type of financial transactions, to just make sure that there is a very comfortable zone in terms of creating the security around that transaction. So we obviously looking for how can we multiply the security, security net around the transaction, so that we are able to give that comfort to the end user. And I think the industry has seen those examples that we have already been talking to in the media, that Airtel Double Safe Pay is basically the way that you are ensured that whatever transaction you are actually making is going in the right hands and it's not going in the wrong hands. So there will be many of these type of applications or security, I would say nets that we will create going forward for different type of enterprise requirements. But yes, that's something that is very relevant for end users to consider, and they need to choose the right service provider. They need to choose the right financial service provider to make sure that this is all secured in terms of their transactions.
Thank you, Sandeep. Mr. Bhatia, if I could have your views on this, in terms of cybersecurity, how do you look at it? There would be bad state actors at play, so what needs to be done? What's your line of thinking here?
So cybersecurity is really one of the big issues. Clearly, it has been well noted both in the national perspective as well as in the international perspective. And a lot of work is going on in terms of how to respond to this bad actors, as you rightly bring out. But sometimes not just bad actors, there are also bad procedures, there are bad systems, there are bad devices. So there are a lot of things that could go wrong. And as we go into the cloud, it's going to multiply. So a lot of work has been done in the area of cybersecurity. Just as an example, as you see, and Sandeep also mentioned about it, that first thing you have to do the encryption within your device itself. That's the first thing, so that any data that goes on the air interface is encrypted. And as you know, in the WhatsApp also they currently do it, but should not be just in an application. I think it has to be done in the device itself at a higher layer. So everything that is out in the air should be fully encrypted end to end, so that first of all your personal data is secure, your messages or your videos, your whatever you're sending is secured. But at a higher level, I think there is a need from a government perspective to make sure that these bad actors are prevented from implementing their wills. So what has been done, I think, in India also and many other countries, we have introduced what we call as the trusted suppliers. So every equipment or a part that goes into the network has to come from a trusted source, and those trusted sources are authenticated by the government and laid down that the operators can only choose equipment from the sources which have been trusted, so that there is no malware, there is no bad code that has been written into that device, which could actually challenge your data, which could manipulate your data. So, and in fact, in the last week only, we were in Geneva, where we were talking about how do we create a global awareness on the cybersecurity, not on a country level, but at the UN level, so that there are norms that are created, there are standards and procedures that are created at a global level to ensure that the user data is safe and secure, and there are no bad actors are not able to take any advantage of the data leakages or of the any of challenges that are there in as we move to the cloud. Cloudification, I think, is going to be a big thing, and that's going to could actually lead to a lot of cybersecurity issues. But I think a lot of challenges have been taken care of, and as we go into the implementation of 5G in India, there will be government will ensure that the sources are trusted, the software is trusted, and there is encryption right from end to end.
Got you. One more follow-up question to you, Mr. Bhatia. Like, we are talking about 5G. We spoke about, the start of the 5G era. Is it too early to talk about 6G as such? What can be done between now and, when we see the 6G era? So your thoughts on that?
So clearly, the 5G momentum is taking off. Many countries around the world have implemented. Release 17 of 3GPP has just been finalized this month. And that's a major step in terms of the standalone NR, which is really the real 6G, real 5G, which is getting implemented. I think almost like 80, 90 countries have implemented 5G services, and there'll be more and more. India is right on the track, although we are delayed, maybe because of COVID or other reasons. So DOT had asked TRAI to recommend what kind of spectrum regulation should be there. And I think it's very important that we get the spectrum at the right price, because if the spectrum is priced so high, like it happened in the last 700 megahertz auctions, there were not many takers. And for the last 10 years, that spectrum has been lying vacant. So we don't want to a repeat of that. And TRAI is working on ensuring that there is a kind of a playing field which is available to the operator, so that they can bid for it at a really reasonable prices, and they are able to provide services, 5G services, in a most economical way. So the reserve price for the 5G spectrum is really one of the very important issues. Entire industry have told the PMO and the TRAI and the DOT that this is a very critical issue. When we go to 5G, we are looking at not just 700 megahertz spectrum, which is also an important, but also 3.5 gigahertz and the millimeter wave band. All of those bands are going to be very important, and the TRAI is going to recommend what should be the base price for those, so that the auctions can take place possibly in Q3 timeframe, and the services are launched this year. And once the services are launched, we are then talking of what to do next. Once the 5G is there, and 5G itself is not a one-day game. I mean, you just don't launch 5G and end of it. 5G will start initially in a small way, and then more and more user segment, more and more applications, more and more requirements will be built into it, and it will grow just like 3GPP releases have been going on, even in the 5G space. Release 15, release 16, release 17, and we will go into release 18. More and more features will be built in. More and more applications and services will be inbuilt. Like we talked about the automated drivers, the driverless cars. We talked about the robotic surgery. We talked about the public safety facial recognition. We talked about the millions of devices, IoT devices working together. So when we talk about 5G services, we are increasing the connection density from about 1,000 in a square kilometer to 1,000,000 in a square kilometer. So think a number of billions of those IoT devices that are going to be there. It's a new business opportunity for the operators, but at the same time, it's also a new service that will be available not just to the public, but to the industry, but to the enterprises. So everybody is going to win in that. So this is the start of it. Now, as we build on it, we move from 5G into what next. So the whole issue of 6G comes up. And I think one of the challenge that has been noted, and many of you might have also observed, that voice has not been a very important criteria in developing 4G and 5G. And to some extent, the voice has suffered because when you do digitization and there is sometimes a packet loss and you think there's a silence on the phone, there's nothing coming because some packets are missed. So I think voice is going to be very important revival in the 6G, connecting the unconnected. And I think Sandeep very rightly brought out the role of satellite, the role of LEOs. OneWeb is one example, Telesat is another, Telelink, and the many other those satellite companies are coming up, which are going to provide connectivity to the places where there is no fiber connectivity, there is no way to put up a base station. We are talking of in the ITU World Radio Conference a new agenda item called HIPS. What is HIPS is basically a high altitude platform IMT base station. That means you take a normal cellular base station and put it on a high platform at 20 kilometers. The kind of service that can provide to places which are completely unconnected. So as we go into the from 5G to 6G, there is going to be a what we call as non-terrestrial network, NTN, and linkage between the terrestrial networks, the normal cellular networks, and the high altitude networks. And once those two links becomes together, then you will have a ubiquitous service at every point in the earth, because many times when you go out in the hills or in the sea, you lose service, and that won't happen in the 6G. So United Nations has this 30 sustainable goals for the 2030. Those sustainable goals are going to be part of the 6G. So 6G is not just increase speed or reduce latency or more devices. It's also going to be how do you connect the whole world. So that is going to be another one of the drivers as we move into 6G. But from the vision perspective, I think the three things that are really, really working in a big way. One is this whole immersive video or the kind of artificial reality or virtual reality, the metaverse. Sitting here, you could actually be sitting in the US and chatting with your friends, and it will look like real. Your avatar sitting there and you sitting here. Those are the kind of things really going to be part of 6G. And as we go into 6G, we are going to look at new spectrum, because the current spectrum is not going to be enough. We are talking of millimeter wave only in terms of 1 gigahertz kind of a channel size. But when we go to that kind of a requirement, we are talking of 10 gigahertz or even 100 gigahertz kind of bandwidth. So there'll be going to be new bands, there'll be going to be new spectrum, and the new regulatory framework that is going to come up. One very important point Sandeep also brought out is the backhaul. And for 5G as well as for 6G, the backhaul connectivity is going to be very, very critical. E-band in that area, I think, is a most important thing. We from the ITU-APT Foundation have written to the government that the E-band should be immediately given freely to the operators without any licensing, without any procedures. They should just get the E-band and they should be free to implement and provide connectivity, backhaul connectivity. That is the only way to implement the thousands and thousands of the base station when we put millimeter wave base stations or when we put the C-band base station. So E-band is very important. But linked to that also is that you also need to connect the households. India is a very concentrated society. If you go to Bombay or if you go to Delhi or many other cities, there are too many people in a small area. And the Wi-Fi spectrum that is currently there is too little. If there are 10 children in one home and all on a remote class, the current Wi-Fi spectrum just cannot take. And if you're talking of a multi-story building where with the 100 houses, it just completely fails. It becomes so slow. So we are talking of V-band also for the public Wi-Fi connectivity. The new 6 GHz band that has opened up around the world is also going to be. So there are going to be a lot of new kind of spectrum that needs to be opened up for Wi-Fi connectivities. But at the same time, the operators have the first requirement of backhaul using E-band. I think the government should very urgently look into that and give that. Thank you.
Thank you. Sandeep, if I could come to you, a two-part question to you. One is, on the 5G part, what's the monetization angle? And again, the long-term vision, what do you think of 6G as such?
Yeah, Prabhu, I think monetization I touched upon. Certainly there is, the new opportunities, as Bharatji mentioned, in terms of serving the industries, serving the industry verticals to help them to transform and digitize themselves in terms of their operations, customer touch points. And I think I gave some examples as to what we are trying to do or what we are working along with the partners ecosystem here in terms of building these use cases. I think the big ones that we see, especially when we talk about private networks, is about manufacturing, where as we're talking about, we can really transform the way the manufacturing industries are going to automate their programmability of their assembly lines, make sure that the AGVs or in vehicles within their campuses are connected, their asset monitoring, asset management, asset location, all that is available as a digital twin towards the operating center of a factory, where you can actually make the things more efficient, reduce the manual interventions as much as possible, and using video analytics and AI/ML really get to the right quality, because today the quality is more at a human level. What needs to be done is to see how we can have more video analytics based quality controls, both in terms of how the machines are operating as well as the end products are getting produced out. Similar things would be in port and mining, because these are big campuses as well. And if you pick up a mining, it's mostly in the remote locations. Ports also are typically at the seashores. So what is required is, again, these layers of connectivity, the layer of asset location. You need to know where your assets are, whether it is, again, I would say, the vehicles in your system, the resources in your system, or even the human beings or the the workers in your system. So I think all these is going to be very relevant. Connected workforce is going to cut across the industry. Healthcare, I think obviously we need it because of very different reasons in terms of being very precise and being very timely in terms of that golden hour that the healthcare gets to really save lives. So I think it's going to be a very different ball game in terms of connecting the ambulances so that all the telemetry during that golden hour is available to the remote doctor or the attendant, and they are able to guide this attendant in the ambulance to do the right thing. So I think this is very, very critical for us to have more safe and safe lives as we live in. So overall, I think so much so that these are the use cases that will really help us and industries overall. And that's how we see value that operators will be able to give to the enterprises and not just the retail customers in terms of using 5G as a technology. So I think these are the things that we are working upon. We have already announced that we will be able to offer private networks as service to our enterprises. What this means is easy adoption and make it a very simplified model, like you buy a SIM today and you get connectivity and you pay per month. What we're doing is, in the similar equivalent phase, we're trying to build a model where enterprises can define what area, how much of devices, how much of capacity they need in their campus, and then we'll provide the solution without them to worry about how many base stations are required or how many core network elements are required. We will provide them the solution as a service, is what we're looking forward, along with the security and the manageability of that particular network. So this is the way we, I think, have to really see to monetize 5G. That's what I would have, Prabhu, for you at this time.
Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate. What we have been able to cover over the last 45 to 50 minutes is essentially talking about, preparing for the 5G era. We touched upon a lot of use cases, both on the consumer as well as the enterprise side of things. Bharatji touched upon, the 5G to 6G shift, what that would entail. We touched upon the standards. And it's been really insightful the way we foresaw this when we began. So just to conclude, if I can have quick thoughts from both of you, any closing comments, and we could then wrap up. Bharatji, first to you, and then Sandeep, you could follow.
Yeah, I think we had a really good conversation here in terms of covering many subjects. But some of the things that I think we should highlight. First, I think as India, as operators in India, as government of India, we need to have more skin in the game. We have been missing, we missed 3G, 4G, we missed technology, 5G, we just touched the technology with 5G for a moment, but nothing. But 6G, we have to be right there in the beginning. I think that's most important. That as one of the largest, I think the largest market in terms of mobile service in the world, we should be at the forefront of developing the standards for 6G. I think that's very important step. And along with the standards, I think I'm more than sure that the operators will start playing a more proactive role in the development of standards. And not just the standards, but also in terms of use cases, in terms of the spectrum rollout, in terms of what next. And that is something I think so far government alone should not be playing that role. I think that role fits very well with the industry, with the operators, with the manufacturers, and all of us have to take that in a big way going forward. That so that the 6G, when it comes in 2030. We are way ahead of the world and not as has happened in the past. So that I think that's a very, very important message in terms of manufacturing, in terms of designing, in terms of R&D, in terms of standards. All of these areas, I think we need to take a front seat rather than the back seat. I think that's the first thing. Second point, I think I touched about, there is a need for balance between both the licensed spectrum and the unlicensed spectrum. Both have a role to play. And particularly for the backhaul, I think the E-band is most important, should be delicensed for the operators immediately. We shouldn't be losing any more time. I think E-band is very critical for the operators. And though I spoke about it, but I think we need to push the government to get that thing done. Thirdly, as we go implementation of 5G, there will be a lot of issues coming up. 5G is much different from 4G. Once the spectrum is being sold at auction to the operators, the implementation will come and it will bring a lot of challenges. And I think the whole government and industry need to work together to solve those challenges. Because when we're talking of from 5 lakh base station, we are maybe talking of 5 crore base stations. And that is where the challenge will come. And I think if we do not put our heads together, if we are not designed all the network in the right way, 5G is going to be a nightmare, and we don't want that to happen. So my message clearly is that let's all work together to make sure that the 5G implementation is hassle-free. It is good for the public, it's good for the operator, it's good for the country, it's good for the industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandeep.
I think Bharatji covered most of it. Let me just say from the operator's perspective that we certainly need the right spectrum, affordable spectrum, and interference-free spectrum. I think we have had some conversations with DOT to share our experiences on 5G or how 5G spectrum in 3.5 has to really coexist with other operations, whether it is in the satellite, in DTH, or with NAVIC. So I think that's very important that we really hash out those issues right now before we end up into having very similar problems like what US had, unfortunately, with the airports and the aircrafts having interference with the 3.5. I don't want to say that that will be an issue, but India would have its own set of coexistence points that we really need to thrash out at this time before we get the plunge into 5G, because we don't want to get another hurdle as we get the spectrum in terms of deployment of that spectrum and rollout. Second point is, I think, which will be very relevant is, as we've been talking about, is the use cases and developing the application ecosystem. So I think we've been playing the role of bringing the startups and the ISVs together along with the industry verticals. But I think this work really needs to be carried forward in multiple manner, or it has to be further accelerated in terms of how the ISVs, the startups in India, the software houses in India, and the vertical industries along with the operators can come together with the right government policies to really harness the power of 5G as we've been talking about. Last but not the least, I think we are always very careful about the way we are deploying the networks from an energy perspective. So I think smart energy solutions and sustainability in terms of what telecom networks are doing towards the ESG goals, the net zero goals. I think that's what the industry should also be very careful about and be very cognizant about, because at the end of it, we have to be careful about what we're deploying is not going to really create more carbon or emissions and take guzzle power, megawatts of energy, but we really need to be smart with the energy solutions, and we're taking a lot of initiatives in this direction as well. Thank you.
Thanks so much. The closing thoughts, the way I look at it, it's that there's so much to look forward to, but we need to be pragmatic also so that there are no missteps as such when we move towards 5G. Thank you, Bharatji. Thank you, Sandeep, for your time, for your wealth of rich insights. This has been a really wonderful session. I hope the audience also loved it. The next time we meet, I hope it's in person. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, speakers, for such an invigorating session.